very proud. They're very proud that they're called the Islamic State, and they insist on it surviving and remaining as such. But it's not a territorially bounded state. So it's not a state.
It's a transnational state, in fact.
Well, it's not a state as we understand a state. So it's not a nation state. It's a state that's constantly seeking to expand its frontiers and its boundaries through warfare. And at best, you can have a 10-year truce with them. So no, I don't think we could, or even the people of the region could, live with them. And one has to remember, first and foremost, that it's the people of the region, Muslims, who are their principal victims. Right? So it's not just about the West, it's not just about India, it's really about the Iraqis and the Syrians and the others in this region who are suffering under their rule. And they do rule over 8 million people.
And a territory that's larger than Great Britain at this point of time. I was on board the USS Carl Vinson last week. It's in the Persian Gulf. And thousands of sorties were being carried out, bombing sorties over Mosul, Tikrit, parts of both Iraq and Syria. Are they any good? Are they achieving the kind of aim that they've set out to achieve? Any positive results of these bombings?
You know, the U.S. military and military power with respect to a group like ISIS is a very blunt instrument. You can destroy them militarily, but to truly eliminate them, you have to eliminate the structural and societal and political factors that produce this kind of phenomenon. And that's a much more difficult problem to face. So in other words, ISIS is a symptom of the political, social, and economic breakdown and dysfunction of Iraqi society, Syrian society, and to some extent other societies, you know, in Libya, for instance, and so on. So to address those problems cannot be destroyed with an F-16 or an F-15. It's a much longer problem and process that cannot be addressed by military power.
In our region, Mr. Saleh, is there fear? The kind of vacuum that existed in Mosul, the Iraqi army was extremely unpopular at one point of time. When the ISIS, their tanks and their Toyota pickups and AK guns, they rolled into Mosul, people actually welcomed them. They occupied a vacuum. Some of that vacuum actually exists in the AFPAC region. Can some form of ISIS take control there? Does that pose a threat to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and perhaps even India?
Well, first about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a very changed country thanks to over a decade of pluralistic system we have had and billions of aid that was poured into the country. Afghanistan today is united against extremism. In the 90s, Taliban was a cause. Today they have been reduced to a group. So we are not trying to diminish a cause. We are trying to finish off a group which is challenging the writ of the state and the pluralistic society that Afghanistan has today. Two, ISIS is very sectarian, and Afghan society in it is blood, genetically in our DNA. We are not sectarian. You do not hear Afghans, creating violence on the day of Ashura or the 10th of Muharram procession. There is no Shia-Sunni divide within Afghanistan. Look at us. For 40 years we have been suffering in one way or another, but there is no secessionist, separatist group in my country. The sense of nationhood is very strong.
Across the border in Pakistan.
Well, I'm coming to that point. Well, they tried for 35 years to empty us of our nationalism and make us extremists. We still remain nationalists. Remember, the Taliban changed Radio Kabul to Radio Sharia. They changed the dress of the Afghan National Army and they put the dress of the Pakistani Khasdar or FC to empty us of that strong sense of nationalism. But you are absolutely right. Former President Hamid Karzai sent me several times to Islamabad to warn the Pakistani establishment that you may think that by unleashing this chaos, you think this is controlled chaos, eventually this AFPAC border will become a territory neither you will be able to represent nor I will be able to represent. But think of it in long run. Those days, the Pakistanis were of the view that extremism is a child we have grown, we will be able to control it forever. Now they are facing a dilemma. The dilemma is part of the extremist groups are still their boys. Part of these extremist groups are trying to bite Pakistan. So what we are trying to say to the Pakistanis today, that it is still time that you take a principled stand against extremism in general, not be selective. But can ISIS exploit that void, that gap which has, as you rightly said, been created along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border? In my opinion, although a lot of people believe that it is President Ghani and his administration who has started a type of appeasing policy towards Islamabad, but we should not also forget another reality, that Pakistan today faces also a dilemma. Will Pakistan army make ISIS its ally, or they will fight it? And if ISIS does take root in that part of the world, which group will lose first territory to ISIS? Certainly it will be the Taliban. Now, why we are not fearful of rise of ISIS? For the following facts, I want to be very brief. A, Afghans have shown that they are very resilient and they are ready to take sacrifice. Two, the Afghan national security forces in this region, despite the fact that they suffer a lot, they are the most experienced forces fighting such groups. And three, the type of experienced countries like Iraq and Syria are going, we have long time ago passed over that. For us, the question is not what ISIS will do that the Taliban have not done. Those orange things only. The orange dress. Everything else, they have done it. So we are not afraid of ISIS gaining traction in my country.
Thank God for small mercies. There are lots of, we'll open the floor to questions now. Questions for our guests who've survived the ISIS and Al-Qaeda, for Professor Hakel and for Amrullah Saleh. Yes, sir, we begin with you. Can you give the mic?
Thank you very much. Perhaps the outer world may not realize that there are more Muslims getting killed than any other religion. In other words, would you agree that there is a civil war going within the Islamic world, whether between Shia and Sunni or more radical Shia? That's one. Would you agree there? And secondly, is there any solution to this?
Professor?
I mean, there's definitely a sectarian war that is happening, but it's not, I would say, necessarily intrinsic to Muslims or to Islam. I mean, behind the sectarian war that we see between Shias and Sunnis are states that are feeding this sentiment. So there is a war, a Cold War between, let's say, Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they each have proxies and actors who are fighting in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iraq. I mean, that's one dimension of it. So I think one has to also think of what states do, states that we recognize as states. If the Iranians and the Saudis, for example, and the government of Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates were not to try to fuel certain types of activity, certain types of sentiments, we would not see as much sectarianism, if at all. I think the first solution is to get the Iranians and the Saudis not to fight with one another through proxies. That would really help.
My question here is to understand, or if any of you there could reflect upon, how is it that we are hearing the same thing, which was started with Taliban, and now it's ISIS, and now it was Boko Haram in Africa. How are we just finding the same situation in different names, and it's spreading like wildfire? As per you, what is the solution for something like this? The world has to adapt to see this reducing and finally getting over with, if there is a solution to it.
Is it for the professor or?
Yeah, it's for the professor.
Professor Hickel.
Okay. I think that the answer to your question has to do with misrule and bad governance. If the Taliban were a product of the civil war. I mean, first the war against the Soviets, and then the civil war that took place in Afghanistan, which led to the destruction of governance and in that country. So when you have political vacuum that is due to bad governance or the failure of government, basically failed states, that vacuum typically is filled by the types of groups that you alluded to. Northern Nigeria is also very badly run. You can see that the oil money that comes from the south in Nigeria was not going to the north, and the government didn't care. So the emergence of radical groups often has to do with bad governance.
Yes, ma'am. The lady behind you.
So my question is to the two gentlemen who have survived ISI's captivity. I'm sure it must have required tremendous amount of strength to actually survive that and come back and tell us about everything that you've been through. But I wanted to ask you that while you were there, did you at any point of time want to give up, like maybe die? And then I have another question. After you came back, after you had to get back to normal life, how hard was it to adjust to everything once again? Like how hard was it to come back and see everything?
Theo, you'd like to go first? Theo and then Nicholas? Yep.
Okay. All right. The first question is, how did I survive? Is that right? Okay. Well, they didn't. Did I want to end it all? I mean, I was very tenacious in my desire to live, and I still want to live. But there was a time when I thought that they were on the verge of killing me, and so I didn't want to allow them to do it in their own way.